Hey everybody, Laura Eisenhower here. I'm so excited that my friend Tony Rodrigues is joining me. I have so many questions for him. I met him a few years ago in Mount Shasta and just was really blown away by his story, and just going to tell you a little bit about him before I introduce him. And basically, Tony Rodrigues, basically considers himself a normal working class man. He works very hard, and he's a family man. What's interesting about him is that he was a participant of something called an Apparent Score Years and Back program. And this all began after he made contact with the son of an alleged Illuminati member. And he'll tell us a little bit about how that all came about. Tony has always had memories of a standard alien abduction and odd memories that didn't make sense. In May of 2015, he had an MRI scan done, and within weeks had huge chunks of years of memories come back that connected all his odd memories of time served both on Earth and in secret space program for a torturous MK Ultra type program, and then living years in Peru doing intuitive work in drug running, and then to lose the intuitive ability and be taken to Seattle to be owned as a sex slave for a satanic worshiping elite. Later to be sold off to secret space programs, where he served a short time on Mars as a support soldier for Mars Colony Corporation. When the Mars program was canceled, he was traded off to Cirrus Colony Corp, where he lived for over a decade, working on German ships as a repairman and eventually cargo engineer on interstellar trade missions. Tony sought help with researchers, only to be invited to do interviews of his memories. Though he had never in his normal life visited Seattle, his memories of living there during a 20 and back led him back to confirm and be shocked to find that indeed everything he remembered was still there and true. Tony since has been an advisor to a foundation on the pedogate elite practices in an effort to stop human trafficking, and has worked with hundreds of people with similar types of memories, as well as authors for books and movie productions based on the score years and back tech. Tony is working on details on a detailed book of his account. So hello, Tony. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Laura. I love to be here. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. So I'm just the Apparent Score Years and Back program. What does that mean exactly?
Well, SCORE is 20 years. There was a lot of debate over people wanted to trademark stuff and coin different terms. If you hear a term that describes it, why not go with it? I don't think it's some kind of bustling business. So I just call it SCORE and back, or 20 and back. It's 20 years. It was 20 years for me. There have been other people that have claimed to go longer, and people that have claimed to just go in shorter, very few. But from my experience, it was 20 and back. And then the ETs that were working on me said that particular program, that tech that they had, only worked 20-year increments. That I had a short reptilian, tell me that when they took any being, not only just a human, but other beings too, could only do 20-year increments with that particular method, because anything longer and they would increase the probability of insanity as a side effect. So they did. It was like a health safety issue where they went only 20 years.
So how much do you know about the agenda behind why you were taken? Like, maybe we'll go into your background, the kid that you met who was connected to the Illuminati member, and what you started to gain as far as your awareness of this proceeding.
Okay, at the time, I think the motivation, so there are many people that I've worked with, I've spoken to, were groomed for it. They were chosen for it. They're like you, for instance, you had it in your family. Somebody had contact, you're related to a president, so obviously had contact with higher up programs. And most people that I've spoken with had somebody relative in the military. They live by a military base. They're groomed for it their whole life. In my instance, I was going to school with a kid and we didn't get along, and his dad had access to these programs, and it was they did it to me as like a revenge, and something to kind of make me more humble. I was a cocky kid at the time, and we did not get along, that kid and I. And I emailed him once years ago. I found him and emailed and asked him if he ever went to my school, and he denied it and said, "Who are you?" And he kind of was defensive. He emailed me back, and I said, "Well, I must be mistaken then. I thought you were somebody that I met, and I wanted to apologize. But have a nice day. Good luck. Thanks for your time. Boom. And that was the end of that communication. But it was him. And so we were two kids. We were 10 years old, 9 and 10 years old that year, that school year of 9 to 10. And we didn't get along. And he pointed me out to his dad. And his dad obviously had a spot for personnel to be used. And they came and got me and put me in.
And you definitely, I mean, you knew that was his dad. That was me.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. They talked, have you ever been in a room where people talked about you loud enough for you to hear it, kind of cavalier, kind of in a way? They did that. His dad came in and was very overqualified to be judged for the science fair. He had many degrees, higher, what do you call it, educated degrees, a PhD. But he had many degrees. He was super educated, according to my teacher, so he was a judge for the science fair. And when we were setting up, the kids that were in the science fair got to go early one morning and set up our stuff and not be in class. And I walked by him and his dad, and he said, "That's the boy I told you about that ruined my confidence that one day, Dad." And I heard it, but I was ignoring it. I tended to just kind of try to tune him out back then, like I do anybody that I don't get along with. And his dad said something. They talked some weird stuff, and I remember him saying, "Well, he doesn't deserve that." And they had a weird conversation with a bunch of stuff that didn't make, it was like, I don't remember what they said, but it didn't make any sense. And so it was that night. It was literally, I think it was that soon. It was that night that I was taken, or within 2 or 3 nights. It was very soon after that. So that would have been April of '82. I originally said '81, and with the researchers that I was 9 years old, but now look back at it, it would have been after the new year in that school year in April. So April of '82, I would have been 10, and I would have went till I was 30, or '82 to 2002. And there was because of the way that the ships, when I got into the last few years of my service with the Germans on the ships, working on basically a UFO, the ships leave and go do a 10-hour day, 8-hour day, and then come back to this close to the same moment they left. So that shaved off a couple years of time. So basically, I was gone from '82 to 2000, but I did a total of 20 years because there's a time travel aspect of it there. So it's hard to explain to people. It's hard to get your head around. That's how it all happened, and I remember it quite well.
Right. So that night you were taken, but then because it's 20 and back, you kind of woke up like nothing happened and a whole 20 years had gone and you were still in the body of the child.
Yes. And so I have a few theories about that. It's not like it's not like I witnessed it or did it, but my theory is that I've heard other accounts of what I call consciousness transference. In other words, I could clone you, Laura, and the clone would be brain dead. It would just lay there and be a vegetable body. And you have a spark of life in you. You have a consciousness. It's whatever, or your chi, your whatever. Every culture has a thing, but it's real, and it's your life signature, your life force. They can take that out and put it into the cloned body. So what happened to me, I believe, because they took me and they did a procedure, and then we had to wait for a while. So I guess they were building a clone body. During the time, I looked exactly like myself too. It was me. But then they did a procedure. It was just like the scene from Fire in the Sky with the blanket over me, and it sucked it tight. And then a needle went in my eye, and I saw stars, like getting sucked out of my body. And when I woke up, I had no memory of mom and dad or my life where I came. I had amnesia. So then at the end of that, then I lived 20 years, and I went through all these programs. And at the end of those 20 years, I think that they send you back in time, which is not as hard as it sounds. And then they can just kill the body. They get all their tech back, any implants they have in it, in a clone body, right? And I had those 20 years of memories. And then they killed that body, and I go right back to my regular body that's laying there, that I've only been gone for a few minutes.
But what was your, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, and I was going to say that when I woke up again, the next day I had all my memories back of mom and dad. Like all those memories that were deleted in the first place when I woke up were back. And then the memories of the 20 years was gone.
Right.
So I think that moving your consciousness into a clone, and then it lives, and then you kill the clone and you go back, that explains the memory lapse. But then years later, I'm not coexisting on the same timeline with my clone, which was until 2000. years after that is when the memories, like at some point of adulthood or consciousness, you reach where I could access those memories, which means the memories are not kept in your brain. They're kept somewhere else, which a lot of people, any really intuitive person already knows that. But a lot of science doesn't. Science does not agree with that. Our understanding of memory doesn't, I don't think, allow for that at this time. But go ahead.
When you were in the clone body, though, what would be the age of that body? Were you still like a 9-year-old, 10-year-old?
Yes, I lived exactly. So, like, I started at that age, about 10 years old, and lived until I was 30.
I see.
And I lived those years. Yeah.
As a child in the secret space, it wasn't like you were put in a body of an older person and then.
Right.
Okay. And so, right. So you were talking about memories not stored in the brain, and then you were something else about that? Or?
From my experience, from that experience. So that's what it was like. So I'm assuming here, it's not like I said, it's not like I was a doctor at it, but that's what the experience was. And what it also lines up with other people that have come forward, other testimonies that say the same thing. So go ahead.
No, I don't want to jump in your train of thought. So
that's fine with me. Oddly enough, I'm not the only one, and many other people have said it the same thing. And then if you take that ability of what I described of being able to take somebody and clone them and then use them for 20 years and put them right back, I was back the next night. What I wanted to say earlier was that waking up the next morning was a very strange experience. I went down to the dinner table, which was odd. Everybody was behaving odd in the house. My dad was weird. My mom made breakfast, which she hardly ever did back then. And it was an awkward morning. And I said, I feel like I haven't seen you guys in years. And that was exactly the feeling. I went to school that day and asked to later on in the day, about 1, 2 o'clock in class, I'm in 4th grade. I asked to use the bathroom and I forgot where it was. It wasn't a big school, but I forgot where the bathroom was because it was so long. And everybody made fun of me. My teacher called my mom and said something about it. Said, boy, he had amnesia because there's no way, how could he forget where the bathroom is? It was right down the hall. He's been using it all year. And all of a sudden he didn't know where I didn't know my way around school. I was really awkward that day. Like I had been gone for a long time. That was the feeling that I had.
So then you started to get your memories back and kind of take us through the chronology of.
So I think what happened. Yeah. So to describe the experience, so from those years forward, whenever something powerful would happen, I wanted to say traumatic, but that's not true. Whenever something powerful would happen to myself, which my name ended up, I had a number. So they changed my name from one place to another. And I always had a number at the end. And at the very end, they named me Jerry. That was my nickname, was the German word gerustet, for being burnt. I got burnt really bad, and they had to fix me. But so they called me gerustet and Jerry for short. Everybody in the crew of the ship nicknamed me Jerry instead of my number, which I don't remember what it was. So I call that guy Jerry. So every time something happened powerful to Jerry, when I got beat up or hurt or a girl kissed me.
When
I was Jerry. Yes, when I was Jerry. So I was living the same timeline. I lived through the 80s at the same time, the beginning, So whenever Jerry had a bad day or a good day, Tony would also have an emotional high and low for no reason, and vice versa, I believe. But I didn't really have a timeline for Jerry. It's not like they celebrated. Yeah. It's kind of like there's two of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's two of you at the same timeline. So if like twins experience the same thing. Like when one twin gets in a car wreck, the other twin all of a sudden knows something's wrong.
Right. So it's like a parallel timeline that you're living out, but in this physical density, it's like no time took place. But as you're growing up as Tony, you're living with this parallel, even though it was time traveled back.
Yes. So, right, because it was at the same time. So when something would happen, I would remember it as Tony as well. So later on, I was in my 20s, in my mid-20s, I would wake up and remember being on a spaceship. I remember looking out the window at the Orion Nebula. There was a time that was very important, and it was rare that they did it. They actually let everybody stop working, even guys that were low on the totem pole like me. They would let us stop working, and they were like, go out, you're not going to get a chance to see this again. Go to one of the windows. And it was like the mid deck. Like the ship had 5 decks, and the mid deck had places with big windows where everybody could stand, like observation deck areas. And so they would say, stop working and go to the observation and look out there. And that was a very big thing for me then. So I would remember that in my real life, and I would think, when did that happen? Because it wasn't a dream. It wasn't like a dream. I said this before in our other podcast, that in a dream, you don't remember how you got there. In a dream, you wake up on a beach, you don't remember driving there, and you don't remember going home or showering or anything like that. You're just dreaming. These memories that felt it was a dream. There were times when I was sleeping, I dreamed, but I could wake up and remember how I got there, how I got home. I remembered things that were not dreamlike. So they were memories.
Were they memories where you were experiencing a memory while it was simultaneously happening, like in the parallel kind of way, or was it more just?
I believe so, or just or nearby the time. So that's what I mean. So in my chronological life, I couldn't justify when I would have a career, because not only was I standing on a ship, but I had, I knew I had to get back to work. I knew that I had a job to do. I had a career. And so when so when I remembered stuff like that, I thought, when could I have done that? I had a full chronological set of memories of my life of growing up in Michigan and going to school and working any jobs that I did. It wasn't like I had time to be gone for years to learn something. So I just brushed it off as it has to be some kind of super awesome, super dream, some different kind of dream that I'm not aware of, because when could I have done that? And it wasn't until it was right after the MRI thing in April, or end of April, beginning of May, first 2 weeks of May. That was right after the MRI for one, and then I saw the Randy Kramer stuff with Dr. Sella, where he explained the 20 effect, the quantum time dilation, that people go and then they're taken back, and I went, oh my God, that's what happened. And as soon as I entertained it and I accepted it, then all the memories just flooded back, and they started to make sense. The memories were kind of always there, but I just was in denial of them. I was like, that's not real. When could that have happened?
Right. So you get there around the age of 9 and 10. So take us into just kind of like the training, what they were training you for, what kind of dynamic was out there in the cosmos. Like there's a lot of different space programs. So which one, and like kind of the chronology.
I'll do the chronology super quick, because there's a lot of stuff and it's hard to always get them out in one interview.
Oh, I'm sure. Right.
They took me. I went to a laboratory somewhere. I'm sitting there with grays and short reptiles, and with hoods, like really strong, and they were telepathically communicating with me. They said they were going to use me. They wanted to borrow my consciousness, was the exact term, borrow my consciousness, for 20 years, and I agreed. Then they put me down, did a procedure, and put a needle. They wanted to find my dominant eye, and they had to wait for a while. And they put like a latex blanket, and then cut it out, and a needle went in my eye right there, and bang. And I woke up in the desert in a place, Inyo Current Air Base, with humans and other kids like me. And we were told we were clones, and we went through a MK Ultra style trauma-based mind control program where they would give us a hallucinogen, probably LSD, I'm guessing, and make us watch movies that were terrible movies, like things, cartoons. It was like Disney cartoons, and then they would show animals getting murdered, and then satanic stuff on there, and it would repeat. We'd watch it all day long, and then he would test us at the end of the day. What was your movie? What'd you? Then they did other things. They gave us drugs, and he had. We went through remote viewing stuff, tests, and they started with sleep deprivation, and it went on. So I don't know how long it went on. A few months, 3 months, 6 months. They would wake you up in the middle of the night. Alarm would go off every 15 minutes all night. Once they started the sleep stuff, and they'd get up one day, they'd come in, they'd smack you, and then we'd have to lay back down, go to sleep. Then 15 minutes later, you'd wake you back up again, do the same thing all night long. And then they eventually did it with electrical shocks. They come and shock you with like a cattle prod thing, boom, and then you could go back to sleep. So what that trained you to do was, when you were shocked, to just stop and go into that catatonic state of mind. And for the rest of my 20 years after that time, I had a collar on Ceres Colony when I was on the off world. I wore a collar that would shock me, and if I was shocked, no matter what I was doing, I would stop what I was doing and await a command. I would just stop and kind of zone out, and whatever I was told to do is what I would do. So that was what they trained us, that program did. So they eventually got it to where they would give us some kind of drug, and we would go out, we would go under, and be like an intuitive. We would be they could flip it on and off. They could drug you. It was an IV bag. They put it in there, and I remember passing out. And when I woke up, people would say that we said the most incredible things, that we would channel people, and they were getting psychic information about the future and the past, and talking to other people that would come through. And all the kids in the class did that. So then they shipped me off to Seattle, where I witnessed there was a billionaire that owned me. I've identified him. I've since found him. I went back. Tony has went back to the house. I told you, after I met you in Shasta, I flew to Seattle that day. Actually, that night I went to Seattle, and the following day I went to that house, and it was not only the house, but the neighborhood, the stores nearby, the beaches, everything. The whole island was exactly how I remember it. And it was the first time that Tony had been there. And so that, to me, that was like put a stamp on it for evidence. And there are other places in the world that I was there too that I could take, that I want to visit still. And because I have I still have intimate memories of living there.
So you kind of going like on space, and then there's locations on land, and you're kind of going back and forth then, and it's still not creating time, even though you're.
Exactly. Well, it was me, but there was one trip to the moon. There was a surgical procedure they did from that time in Inyo during the MK Ultra stuff. We did take a trip to the moon, and it was a procedure that they did. Like, we got surgeries done to make us more proficient at whatever you classify it, remote viewing, ESP, channeling, I don't know, whatever you can throw a blanket over it, that kind of work, intuitive work. There was a procedure that we had to fly to the moon and get it done, that they didn't have it here on Earth, the tech. So they did that, and then I came right back to Inyo and then off to Seattle for a week maybe, and then to Peru. And what happened in Peru was that they were shipping Puerto Tawantinsuyo, Peru is the town in the jungle, and people would bring cocaine. They had laboratories making cocaine in the woods, in the jungle, and then they would bring it there, and when they had a plane load of it, they would fly a plane to Santa Marta, Colombia, and offload it. One of the planes went down in bad weather or so under some circumstance, so they paid for me to be there. I was a piece of equipment. I was an intuitive. I was a piece of equipment, and there was a guy that took care of me. That was the only one that spoke English in the town, and so he was stuck with taking care of me. And I was there for about 2 years, so 10, 11, 12, right till 13, right before I turned 13. In those years, I was there. I lived there. I had a little room with a black and white TV, and I was mentally damaged. I was a damaged kid. They called me a crazy kid. And about once a month, we would do trips on the plane. It was a C-46 Commando. It had the little window in front. I remember one day they let me crawl down. It was like really tight squeeze to get to it. They let me crawl in the front, look out the window at the very front. And about once a month we'd do that. They put me on a cot. He'd put me under. And I would tell them if there were going to be police or bad weather or whatever. He said that he talked to his dead grandmother. He said that while I was under, there were times I spoke fluent Spanish, and I don't know Spanish, and I didn't then. And he said that he talked to his dead grandmother, and after a while, people in the village, people in the town would give him questions to ask me while I was under. And, he wrote down stuff. So it was a big deal. So after a few missions, after a few months of me doing that, everybody in town kind of, the crowd parted when I walked through. Everybody gave me, distance. I had importance to them. And I really, for the rest of those 20 years after I left, the day I left, they all lined up and waved goodbye to me. And it felt very special to me. And for the rest of the time after that, I missed it. I always wanted to go back there. But for me now, it doesn't make sense. I've looked into going back there, and to not be able to speak Spanish, it's a very lawless place. And they say there's illegal gold mining going on. There's still the cocaine business is there, and people die going there. So it's not something I could just up and go. It's not like they have a Holiday Inn
right
that I could check into.
So your job was to like run drugs, or was that?
I was an intuitive on a plane that was doing that.
Right.
And after a while, right around puberty, toward the end, I started losing the ability. And I was getting sicker and sicker. Each time they put me under, I'd stay sick for a week, And so they sent me back to Seattle. And I stayed there for a few years. And it's funny because, so this is 2015. If you look back on the news articles of everything, the Hillary Gate and everything, I was the first one to come out and say that there was a connection between the space program and any of the pedogate stuff. I was the first one that said that these people that are in this organization that had me, I was the first one that said there was any of the satanic sex stuff that was going on. And that was at that house in Seattle. The billionaire that owned me, was a practicing Satanist, and he sacrificed ritual human sacrifice. And he did the adrenochrome and all that, exactly how people say. And I reported this back in 15, and it's all come to light really since then. I never heard of it before that.
So tell us more about your experience in Seattle. And one quick question though, if you were time traveled back and you're actually experiencing Earth years while Tony's just in bed?
That's right. There were two of me.
You're just sleeping and you wake up the next morning, but then you got this other part that's actually living out years on Earth.
There was a Tony in Seattle, and there was gonna be Jerry in Seattle, and the same day, the same time, there was Tony in Michigan. There were two of me.
But
it was a shared consciousness.
But the time travel was where the memories were wiped. But again,
for me, the experience, the experience was, there's a diagram of it, but basically here's a timeline. I went here, and then I went and was taken and lived those 20 years and then put back. That's how I experienced. So that the 20 years, the Seattle time and the 20 back, I experienced that first, and then went back into my life, and then experienced my life. And now I'm 47. It's been years later, but it's not like they were both at the same time that I was kind of flaky in and out. Like when I woke up the next day, I felt 20 years older.
And that was after the Seattle and everything woke up and all that. But then as you live, it's a parallel thing that's going on. That's why you remember. So tell me about what happened in Seattle and how this relates to what we're seeing in the news with Epstein and these types that have these islands and they're doing child trafficking, and how it connects with, like you said, Satanism and secret space programs.
Sure. Well, so that billionaire, and I don't say it publicly, he still has family alive. They may or may not be. It's just not responsible for me to go and blurt out names. I have shared his name and the place with researchers and with Secret Service people in the government that pertain to this, that have questioned me. I have shared that with researchers. But so the person that owned me was a practicing Satanist. He had a giant company. He was a billionaire, public figure, and he was doing fundraisers. He would throw parties, and they were fundraisers and I'm not picking a side here, but I'm saying his particular instance, they were Republican Party fundraisers, and he was backing candidates in the local area and on a national level. And the parties were public parties. They were fun. People would come. It was like a picnic and stuff at his house. And then after the party was over at 9 o'clock at night, they clean up, and then it was a dinner party with people that were in on it, military people and political people. And they were sex parties. They were doing sex and drugs, and it was like catered, and there were girls. They had girls. We were boys. The house that I stayed in at any given time had 6 to 9 boys living there, and they would come and go. And they had it set up legally, like they were like it was an adoption thing or like a foster care, and it wasn't. They were boys. There were boys that tried to get away, got caught. But
that's the child trafficking part of it.
They were trafficking, right? And so I wasn't allowed to speak to any of those boys about the moon or anything that I knew. Everybody thought I was crazy. I was mind broken, so I was a little off to those boys during that time.
But as far as the billionaire was concerned, he knew about the secret space program part.
He did, and there were people at those parties that knew what I was. There were times I was pulled aside, and they said, "This is one of them," and he's.
So
that's another story. I don't want to implicate stuff, but there were people that would be at those parties that had knowledge of what was going on.
But not every kid was in the secret space program.
Exactly. And we were trained to do that. And they had a schedule. It was it was in the summertime, once or twice a month in the summer, they'd throw a party. And it wasn't I didn't end up at all the parties. And they would give us a radical drug. I don't know what it was. It was an injection, and it only lasted an hour or so, but you couldn't feel a thing. It was like you were just zonked out. And we were a sex, we were a part of the party. We were a.
And what did that? And what would that consist of? I mean, I don't want to take you into any uncomfortable place.
It's uncomfortable, but what people should know that's what's been going on. That's people don't want to believe it, but that's what's been going on. So there would always be 3 boys there. There'd be 2 boys working the crowd, and we weren't allowed to stand up, and we weren't allowed to open our mouths. Close our mouths. We couldn't close your mouth, and we couldn't stand up. and anybody that wanted to come by and do whatever they wanted to us could. And there was a guy there that was a big security guy, and if we did anything wrong, or he would punch us and kick us out and put another boy there. And so you got chosen for that. So those parties, and there were boys that got took to other parties too. But I didn't
have your mouth closed, which means that you were expected
available
to perform sexual acts.
Yes.
And would men and women, these powerful people, partake?
Yes.
And what was the satanic element? Were they in their bodies?
So look on the soundtrack, so they had, so this was weird, is a lot of times when music would come out, there were like I've talked about this, like Led Zeppelin songs and Aerosmith that would come out in my life, and I'd go, that's an old song, when it was brand new on the radio, because to me it was already old, because I was listening to it at those parties. If you think about, so the song Take On Me by a-ha, they play it at those parties. So it was in that year that it came out. It was like 86. So that's how I know. So they would play that song then, but in between that, they would go, they counted down to midnight. They counted down to some countdown to darkness, and they'd shut all the lights off right at midnight. And then that was one of the parties. And then there was another one. There, like a voice would come out, like a DJ, like they played the songs, and then it would say, you can do as you wish. That will be the sum of the law. And then the music would kick back on. And like they did stuff like that in between the songs. And it was just like it was like a mild, like a lot of the people that were at that party didn't know that the satanic stuff was going on. Like the ritual was back in the house.
But
like we were out on the lawn.
Right, but they were witnessing what they were doing to the boys, these powerful people. They didn't know
it was sex stuff. So there was a stage with girls, and I talked about this before, that we were supposed to point in a certain direction so that there was a camera 100 feet away or a couple hundred feet away in the bushes that they were taking pictures, and if we were having sex with somebody, we were supposed to point in a certain direction so that the camera could get their face.
So blackmail people?
It was setting up, right, that it was absolutely going on.
And
there were people there that were appalled by it too. There were people that were there for the first time, and they were like, whoa. And like I remember there was a guy that was a doctor that walked up, and he checked, he looked into my eyes, my pupils were dilated, and we were getting beat up and raped basically. And he was just appalled by what he saw, but he couldn't do anything about it, and he knew it. He was just like almost in tears. I remember that, because he was, every now and then there was somebody that was sympathetic to what was going on, but for the most part, it was the norm for them. It wasn't their first rodeo, most of the people that were there.
And what was the purpose as far as they're concerned? They have the option to have a mate, somebody to share life with. There's other options of how to get sexual energies. Were they drugged and blackmailed? Were they,
I think it was more like a hedonist thing. I think it was more like a, if you're with us, you can do whatever you want. Kind of. That was the theme.
How is that in anybody's? There's things that one can relate to. Like, okay, everybody. I can understand why somebody might solicit a prostitute if they're, an older man and they have never had a part. Like, there's some things that make some kind of sense, even though it's not something I relate to. And I'm not supporting that whole thing at all. But how can anybody think that it's okay to abuse a child like this? It's so hard to wrap one's head around the mindset that finds that appropriate or even arousing. Like, I don't know.
Right. That's what's hard for me to get my head around too. To be perfectly, there's other stuff. Like, I don't want to get into the really graphic, I don't want to go too far, but there were some things, like they had things in place. Like, we weren't super young kids. We were 12, 13, 14. So yes, too young, but there was a blurry line there. It wasn't like, the really, so they did that. So there were even kids that were 16, 17, 18. So that could be confusing.
And it was both boys and girls. And
yes, right.
So, okay, so
the girls were at a different house. Like, we never had contact. Like us, they were training us. They wanted us to be gay, but it would have been great. It would have been better if I was, but I wasn't. So it was kind of, it was a difficult thing. But the girls, they kept images of girls away. We weren't allowed to watch shows with a lot of girls in them, and they kept all the girls away from us the whole time. But there was another house where they had probably 10 girls too that came and went. Same thing.
You said something about a stage though, where the girls were.
The girls were on stage, and now that would always get crowded. You could see, like, sometimes they would have the big feathers. I remember seeing the girls walk on stage and they had like Mardi Gras, like the big feathers. Like, you could see the girl, and there would always be a long line. And there were guys that would come to us because the line was too long for the girls. Like that's a reality of how that worked.
Okay, so so outside is one thing, and everybody seems to be in sort of this hedonistic mindset, and it's just part of like the party. And then inside is like satanic rituals happening where there's.
I knew that they had that happening because during that day we had to stay, like during the party, the public affair that was the fundraiser. There'd be thousands of people. It was a big property. During the day we had to stay in our room, but you could see the props. I knew from sitting in on a couple of their rituals that they did. They had props. They had things that they had like an incense burner, and they had masks that they wore, and they would have those laying out for that night. So I know that was going on too during those parties. So that, you know what I mean? Like, you think about a group of a few hundred people, and probably 10 or 15 of them were actually in on it.
Practicing Satanists, and that would involve some sort of sacrifice. And was that where they extracted the adrenochrome, or is that or drinking?
Okay, so I witnessed one such act, and they called us in one at a time. There were 3 of us kids, and it was in the very beginning when I first went there. They called us in one at a time, and there was a altar with a boy on it, and he was opened up and dead, and he had buckets that he was drained his blood into, and he made us. It was like a communion ritual, and he asked me, I don't want to go too detailed into it. It's pretty dark stuff, but it was like a communion ritual where you had to drink some and eat some of them. And then they put us on tables and did the drug of us, the intuitive thing, and put me under, so that he was getting business information, from having psychic kids from owning psychic kids through this program, which I traced back to Project Grill Flame from the CIA. It was an element of Project Grill Flame.
Grill Flame?
Grill Flame was the funding because of the place it was and the people involved. I think it came through a certain institute, but without proof, I can't just name a bunch of names, but it was a lot of that same technology that spawned off. So we were a military version of that stuff. So I'll fast forward. I'll get into space here. I don't want to dwell on this too long before it gets. I don't want to.
Right, but real quick. So Epstein and all that, it's the same kind of thing going on at the island. And
it looks like it. Yeah, right. It looks exactly like the same operation. That's exactly what would happen.
And we'll see how the Clintons are connected and other politicians and celebrities, and hopefully this will all come to the surface.
Yeah, it sounds like the exact same methods, and I can say this, that it wasn't something that they were winging. Like, they knew exactly everything. They knew what they were doing. It was a process. Like, they knew what the kids would do. They knew what was going to go on. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew a certain amount of kids would run away, and they knew how to catch them. And like, they had been at it a long time. It wasn't something that they had just picked up and started doing. They'd been at it a long time. They were professional, industrial level, industrial grade sexual child trafficking.
Right. And the blackmail part would be to own these powerful people so that they could use that against them if they were to turn away from the cult, I guess.
Yeah, and it was a lot of people in the military too. There was a lot of people that were military personnel.
Okay, well, let's shift gears to your time in space then. And you can just draw a connection between the child trafficking and the secret space programs.
Right. So what happened was, in between the parties, the rest of the time, it was just like living in an orphanage in a giant house with a swimming pool. I mean, it wasn't bad. Other than it was very emotionally cold. We all, we got treated bad from each other. It wasn't a very emotionally supportive situation. None of the boys really got along. And there was no real like nurturing relationships. It was like being in prison, but albeit a gilded cage, a nice prison. But every morning we were on a strict diet. They kept us skinny, and every morning we had to get up and do calisthenics and take pills, a couple pills, and then do a workout. And they changed the pills one day, and I was allergic to them. And after 3 days of them, I couldn't use. I was puking from it. I couldn't do it. And I said, "Can we go back to the old pills?" And she made the proper calls about it, and said that it was that or I go off to the military. I either get used to them. So about 2 weeks later, that was the deal. I was like a dead man. Like they quit talking to me, and they knew I was going. And she drove me to a parking lot behind a big store, and some guys in a van grabbed me, and they gave me an injection in my arm, and I passed out, and I woke up on a spacecraft on my way to the moon. And that's where I was in a van, and they gave me a shot, and I passed out. And when I woke up, I was sitting in a space like a TR-3B, the one that it was just like being in an airplane, but the rows were really wide. Like there were 20 seats wide, 25 maybe seats. It was super wide rows, and there were military guys, and there was a guy there. He's like, I was awake. I came to, and he told me what was going on, that I was going to go on and be trained. I went in there, and it was a base. We dropped people off at one base, I think. It went to another one. It's vague. But I went in, and it was like they would give me a drug and put headphones on you, and I would be plugged into a screen, a computer, like a monitor, and they showed me movies, and it was about fight or flight response. They programmed me to not flee when I was afraid. Like, that you have fight or flight. Mm-hmm. And that was all my military training I got. They didn't teach me how to do, like throw grenades and all that stuff. And it was me and a dozen other kids probably, and they marched us to another part, and we flew to another base on the backside of the moon. And then we dropped off, and they marched us down to an arena, and they tested us out, and they gave us explosives, and like they told it basically to become suicide bombers, and put us in an arena and on the other end a giant bug came out. And just like Randy describes on Mars, it was a giant spider-looking bug. I've had some pretty good artist drawings of it. And one of the kids that we were, there was a dozen of us, and one of the kids ran up to it and detonated it and blew himself in half and killed the bug. And I was told he lived, but he didn't go with us. So after that, we went in and got a checkup in a hospital room, and we slept in the bed that night. And the next day, we were flown to Mars, and I was taken to Mars and put in a forward base, and where there were active military missions going against bugs, indigenous insects that live on Mars. And I was there like a few months.
And they had the kind of technologies that if you got injured or a limb got blown off, they would grow back. They could grow it back.
Right. I did 3 missions, so that we were going every other day. Like there were 6 of us that would go one day, and then 6 of us would go the next day. And the first 2 missions, I had no contact with anything. The third mission was more aggressive, and we had contact with the bugs, and guys died. I think 3 of us died on that one.
And then they brought you back.
And I lost an arm. I got an arm bit off, and my foot from the ankle. And the soldiers carried me back, and I passed out. I lost a lot of blood. They said I had to stay awake, and they kept slapping me. And I remember seeing the sunset was purple and cloudy. It was, the weather on Mars changed very fast. And as soon as I saw the doors to the base, he let me go to sleep. I wanted to pass out. I lost blood. And when I woke up, I had my arm and my foot back, and I don't know how.
So, okay. Why? It was to protect the bases. You would be warring with these indigenous beings on Mars, or to be able to protect the bases, or you were? My
understanding was that particular base had been established and had people there working, and they were doing research, and it was close. The bugs were very territorial, and it was close to a territory, and it got overrun, and a lot of people died. And so the base itself was underground. There were 5 or 6 levels, but it was empty. It was a base big enough for hundreds of people, and there were only like 50 people there that I saw. Like it was a abandoned base basically, because it had been attacked. So they were testing ways. So we were a support soldier. They were testing ways to put more people on the ground with minimal training to help out the soldiers that really had training, that were expensive.
So it was trying to make the base safe again?
I think so. Or yeah, it was a test bed. It was an experiment.
How many bases do you think are on Mars? Or
I wouldn't have a clue,
right,
to be honest with you, but there were many. The impression was that there were many.
Right.
And they were underground like that. That program got canceled, and then I got taken to a bigger city that was also underground on Mars that had domes, big dome structures. And it was another bout of the same thing, the same kind of programming. And I did testing, aptitude testing, to see what I was good for. And then they trained me to fix ships, to do ship repair, ship maintenance.
And what kind of beings piloted those ships?
Humans, Germans. So, and then I went on a train that lifted, and it was like went through a portal, and the train. I'm trying to skip through it all fast and not give all the details, but the train went into a tunnel. There was a poof, a flash of light. There was a weird disorienting feeling, and then it started stopping immediately. And when we got out, it was a hangar, and there were hundreds of Germans. And the dirt was a different, like on Mars, even on the walls, like there were places that things were made out of like the dirt color, like red. And when the train stopped, everything was gray colored, like a white chalky dirt color. The pavement, the cement was a different kind, and they were Germans. It was a straight up German facility colony.
So the way what's kind of coming through is the child trafficking and these billionaires and the Satanists seem to be connected to the Dracos or the reptilians, and that's maybe where it links into the space program. It's because we're dealing with off-planet influences that are a part of this strange cult behavior. Is that
exactly? So this is good because Laura, so you're somebody that has a great deal of understanding. It's not every day I can have a conversation with somebody on this level. My personal theory, and there are many little things that led me to believe it, was that because they knew that his life was going to make him a billionaire, that he was going to have that kind of power, that they used the tech that a draconian, a reptile, or some can come down and put their consciousness in that person's body, because they have a time travel tech, because the bases are kept in. They have bases around Jupiter in temporal bubbles that are outside of time. So they can come out of that bubble into the future, or go back into it and come out of it into the past. And they have a list of things from the future. They go, this guy's a billionaire, this guy's a billionaire, this guy. So when they, at a certain time in their age, in their life, they can go and take their consciousness out and put a reptile there and basically be in charge.
So the rituals would be the reason all this feeding and all this stuff is because it's actually feeding a reptile,
Because they're reptiles and they eat us anyway. It's a normality for them.
And so
it's abnormal for us.
Right. So the Satanist factor, is that a Draco thing, or is that sort of a mask for this agenda to say this is about satanic ritual?
It could be the tip of a bigger iceberg. I don't know. But I have a good feeling that the guy that owned me, the owner in Seattle, was indeed, his consciousness was an ET thing. Like, he was born and raised on Earth and had an Earth life, but I think his consciousness had been influenced. Either that, or he did time and space for these people, like he did a 20 back, in the good way, and was recruited and worked with them.
And so obviously this billionaire was part of the satanic rituals. You said just a small number of people were. So,
yes.
And if they can just snatch any of us, I mean, is there a way people can protect themselves from this? I mean, is it a certain type that or are we all just vulnerable to?
Well, they said that there were genetics involved, but not everybody can go. Not everybody can do it. And I don't know what the genetics enable you to do. If it's the cloning, if it's the time travel, I don't know what aspect of it requires a certain kind of genetic. But there are genetic limits. Like, not everybody can be taken.
Right. And so most of the powers.
And I got to think that they've got it down to a science, so they don't take people that can. Like, I was an anomaly because I remember. And also, because I wasn't groomed into a program, I think later on that my records were deleted. That there was a slip up in my, like, I went through the cracks. I wasn't the norm for the kind of people that went through this.
Usually they target you at school, maybe for a MyLab thing, or it has to do with family or a military background. And because you dealt with this kid whose father, decided.
Right, and they said, we'll run him through too. If he goes, he goes.
They want to check and make sure that you wouldn't be somebody who remembers, or they can't really tell, I guess.
It was weird after I got back. So, maybe a month later after I got back, my family doctor, we went to a family doctor in a small town, and he was an old guy. They made up a reason and said that I had to come in for a checkup. My mom thought it was weird. I remember this. It stood out. And it's something that I thought about later that I went, wow, this is about that time. So there was a guy there, instead of the doctor, he had won a trip to a seminar or something out of state. So they sent us a notice saying that we had to come on a certain day. And on the day we were there, the doctor had won something to go away to a certain trip. And the doctor that was there was this young guy. And my mom was like blown away. She always talked. She went home and told everybody how handsome this guy was. But he was a specialist in brain surgery. Like he was way overqualified to be a family doctor that day. And when I got to the waiting room, which I did this all the time, my doctor, there was never anybody else there. There were like 5 kids from my school there that all got the same kind of notice to see this doctor that day. When I went in and saw him, he gave me the stethoscope and this and temperature, and then all he wanted to know was what my dreams were. Have you had any strange dreams lately? Like, what doctor asked you this? And I'm going, no. I was scared. I went, no. And he said, tell me about your dreams. What can you remember your last dream you had? And that, like, he grilled me for like 10 minutes on what my dreams were. And I was totally like, no, everything's normal. But that was a follow-up. Like they knew what was going on. It was a follow-up to see if I was beginning to get memories.
So this doctor was just sort of like placed there for a reason to
follow up, to see if I had residual memories of anything that happened.
And the other kids that were called too, do you think they were part of
I think that they probably went as well. Exactly. I think they scooped a bunch of kids up from our school.
Wow.
I think that those people, it follows them around. I think that you say, well, is it random? If there's 100 people that have access to this and it's where they go through their life, that's what happens. I'll bet if you take people that get taken and, some of the more famous ones, I'll bet if you look at their life, I'll bet there are extraordinary people that they bumped into prior to that. You know what I mean?
Wait, not quite. Kind of.
I think that a lot of people are taken because of who they bump into in their day-to-day life.
Oh, right. Okay.
And that person says, oh, I'll bet they'd be good for it. And boom, they go. Like
the child trafficking thing where they recruit, like we hear about the victims coming forward with Epstein. Somebody comes out, recruits, the vulnerable person, tries to.
Yes, exactly. Well, everybody thinks that, it's not widespread. How come, if there's taken so many people, then how come I don't know anybody that did it? How come and for a few reasons. Number one, there's a lot of people to choose from. There's 300 million people. So if you take only 100,000 of them, that's very few, for one. And for two, the memory blanking works. So when I wanted to remember it, I couldn't. And it just came back to me as a natural thing. Like later in life, there was a time when I guess the memories just happened. Maybe it was the MRI. I don't know. But I think I'm the rarity. Most of the people that I remember, that I speak to, that have memories, don't have as many. They have a few keystone memories of it seems to be the most emotional, most traumatic memories of what people remember. That doesn't get deleted. People remember the times that they were very stressed. Maybe those memories are stored somewhere different.
So, like on a larger picture level, when we look at the state of the world and timelines and where we're all headed and the galactic history behind how this even is possible, how do you kind of like process the larger picture as far as these races? I mean, and this part of the secret space program that seems to be connected to a dark agenda for the rest of the planet.
Well, I think there are many agendas going on. When you think about it now, you can look at it like people want to think that there's a giant federation of great ETs that they do good and they give people free stuff and they're great and they're benevolent, they're going to help us, and that's that. And then other people don't want to admit that there's any negative ETs. And I don't want to put it in a basket like these guys are good, these guys are bad. You look at the United States as a whole. Look at our government as a whole. It's not evil. It's not completely evil, but there are departments, there are people that do evil things that happen to work for the United States. Do you get what I'm saying? Like it's bigger than that. It's more complex than that. We do great things. The average American is not an evil person, but our country as a whole does some things that are very bad. And it's not because we're all evil. And the ETs are the exact same way. So they have departments. They, a Nordic can come down, a Nordic ship can come down and do something. That doesn't mean they speak for every Nordic.
Right. So,
and I think that's what goes on. I think that a lot of the Another thing that people don't realize is the same way that we don't interfere with animals in the wilderness. You know, if an animal kills another animal, we don't care. We don't. That's just in nature because they're animals to us. That's how we are looked at by other humanoid beings that are advanced. You know, they least leave us alone because we only live 80, 100 years. We're only 100-year humanoid. They live 1,000 years. They have 1,000,000 words. We have 100,000 words. They have 1,000,000 words. They have telepathy, no secrets. So they look at us as a lower thing. Just let us do our own thing.
But
So
then,
that's why there's not a lot of interference.
but,
And this is my opinion. You know, just what I vaguely remember.
but here we have the potential to really advance ourselves, understand our junk DNA, and what sort of interference, because we have the potential to be far more advanced than we are. What sort of, and then some ETs have, manipulated us or messed with our genetics, or can you talk at all about just the ones that have interfered versus maybe ones that kind of leave us alone? Do you know much about that, or?
So as far as I know, that we had a territory. We were within a territory of the Draco, so that they had say over us to do whatever, and they set us up to be a resource. So that's what happened to us. And at the same time, because of you take the natural aspect of why we're here. You know, when people incarnate, I believe in the soul that lives forever, and I believe that you go through many lives until you get it right. So people incarnate here on purpose for the challenge of it, and it's nice to come down here. And I mean, like I said, the reality is we live a short time compared to other humanoids. We should live much longer than what we do.
Right.
And so that's an advantage if you wanted to come down and just see, for instance, what it would be like to be a girl. Be like, I've been a guy this whole time. Let me check it out. I'm only going to do it for 80 years, though. If I like it, then I'll do it again. I think that's kind of the purpose of where we're at, of our level of consciousness. That's the purpose of it. Is kind of a lease of lifestyles.
But we were interfered with to be used as a resource so that we wouldn't be able
and
to.
that opened the door to be taken advantage of. Exactly.
And if we can advance beyond that, then we won't be the food source for these beings. And so that's our challenge as a whole.
Right, because
move into this ascension. What are your thoughts on ascension? Anyway, what were you going to say?
My thoughts on ascension are okay. So they've held us back a long time from, and we talked about this last time, how the people that I see around me in my day-to-day life are basically good people. But most people, I'm in America, I'm in northern Michigan right now. Most people that I come across don't care about anything other than what's going on. They care about their situation. Like most of them are whatever, want to get ahead. They want to take care of their survival thing, and they've done very well.
Yeah.
Their own survival is guaranteed. They've done very well with their own survival. They can go shopping. They can do whatever they want, and they have no desire to go to any higher pursuit of helping anybody else, learning anything else, or caring. Okay, so most people nowadays, back in the day, nobody believed in ETs. I sat at the table. It was hilarious. I sat at lunch with a bunch of guys the other day, and they're talking about the Netflix show with Bob Lazar, and they're like, I believe there's got to be ETs up there. And I poked my head up on, and I'm thinking, boy, it's hilarious that you guys are sitting at the table with me. And I didn't really want to chime in because it's not my responsibility to force it down someone's throat if they don't ask. But they didn't care. The one guy said, I know there's ETs out there. And the other guy was like, yeah, but so what? They didn't care. They don't care they don't see it for what it is. They don't see it for what it is. That just having just having a large bank account isn't it. That's not what is, you know what I mean? We have much more work to do in making ourselves better people. And you can take that with you. When you make yourself a bigger consciousness, when you can get in touch with other things, when you can really expand on your consciousness and do the self work, you take that with you. And just having the bases met, which is what everybody around here does, is they just have their survival guaranteed. They've got their survival actually mastered. You can't take that with you.
Right. Well, once everything kind of comes to the surface that's what's great about what's going on in the news right now, is people will take a double take when they start to see, wow, royalty, celebrities, politicians have been a part of this really, dark stuff. And then that should open the doorway to the secret space program thing. And then maybe everybody's survival world and what they're trying to pursue, realizing that a lot of people with money are very, corrupt. It'll open some eyes. But as we advance, when we look at benevolent races or benevolent ETs and what our human potential is, what are your thoughts? You feel that we're heading in that direction where we move into higher harmonic universes, higher earth energies?
Let me ask you this. If you were a higher density being, like let's say that you, Laura, right now lived on another planet and you could get here to Earth in 5 minutes, but your planet you live on is telepathic and nobody has any secrets and there's really not a lot of crime. Everybody's on the same page. You all work towards the same kind of goal. Some of you don't. And, but it's basically, people are worrying about spiritual pursuits, a higher, nobler purpose. What do you think would happen if you came down into Los Angeles downtown and walked around for a period of time? You get victimized. You know what I mean? At very minimum, somebody would make fun of you eventually. You'd be victimized.
Oh yeah,
that's where we're at.
Yeah,
people that don't fit in are we're still in that pack mentality right now. So
it's the personality matrix, the mind control, the unconsciousness. It's being an advanced soul or being here is incredibly difficult, and that's I work with clients all the time with that perspective of knowing, most of us feel completely whacked by this place.
People that are on that level of worrying about their self, that, like I said, they're worrying about their situation, their survival, don't respect people that are not surviving as well as they are. We're trained to, if you're not surviving as well as me, then you're not as good as me. That's totally not the truth. Yeah. But so for ET, I wouldn't blame a benevolent ET for wanting to come down here because we're brainwashed right now. So that's got to go away. So what's funny is you just talked about the news, and just yesterday on the news, I saw that we're going back to the moon.
Talk to us about, current events and what you're seeing in the world. And
apparently Trump signed a thing with NASA that we're going back to the moon in 2024. Coincidentally, at the end, if he wins the next term, it'll be coincidentally at the very end of his term. And last year, Randy Kramer talked about it, that he had spoke with his brigadier general that was the ideal time for them to have a disclosure event at the end of a presidency. So just coincidentally, the guy that started the Space Force is also that's supposedly working with the military-industrial complex that's overthrown a lot of these satanic worshiping elites. And there's been, wars going on in space, battles in space. Just coincidentally, he's announced that at the end of his second term, if he wins it, of course, at the end of his second term, that we're going to just happen to land men on the moon. So I can see that opens the door to a disclosure event. They're going to go to the moon, the South Pole, and either find a structure, or the ETs can contact us and they can concoct whatever story they want to say, oh, you guys finally made it. We've been waiting for you to get here. Now you guys are qualified to be in our group. Here you go. Now there's life. Mm-hmm. So even though the program's been going on for 100 years.
Right. Well, I just really feel like whatever goals we have for ourselves individually are reachable. If it means ascension for some, they're going to ascend. If others are just concerned with survival, it's going to be the survival. As these things begin to get more and more disclosed, people will be opened up to more options and a much larger view. So these sort of news events and these things that we're seeing are, that's part of the shift. Didn't you mention before something about you and Antarctica?
We did missions there. So the last few years of my time on Ceres colony, so Ceres is a small planetoid just in between Mars and the asteroid belt, and that's where the Germans were. That's where I lived for like a decade. It's a small planet, but we came to Earth quite a bit.
Wait, real quick. When you talk about the Germans, are you talking about Nazi Germans or regular Germans?
Nazi Germans.
Okay,
I mean, not exactly Nazis. They had a curved swastika. It looked like I thought it was like a galaxy. I thought that they were representing a galaxy out of it. It was like a swastika, but it was rounded.
Okay, so go back to the Antarctica.
So, but we would do missions there, and whenever we did go to Antarctica, there were times when there's a place in the Catarina Mountains in South America where we could enter into the inside of the Earth, and there was a place where we met, and there were people, there were more advanced races inside the Earth that could fly through the rocks. They could fly right through a wall, and the Germans wanted that tech really bad, and they were begging to trade with them. And they kind of were like, those people were really, they really looked down to us, the Germans. But anyhow, so we would take stuff there, and we would deliver cargo for them, so that they could send stuff cargo anonymously and blame it on us, or whatever advantage it was, I don't know. But we did that often. I remember looking, it was like there would always be water coming in, and you could see sunlight, but there was a big rock thing, and then their ship would pull up. Our ship would come sideways, we'd unload cargo, and their ship would pull up right on the cliff, and it would just hover there, and we'd load them. Anyhow, we went there from there underwater to Antarctica sometimes, and I remember I hated being underwater in the ship. It made noises. Like the hull would pop. It would flex, pang, and it sounded terrible. It was terrifying to me. I was always afraid of getting caught underwater. But when we went there, they would make us clean everything up very good, because the officers on my ship would be could get in trouble. Like, they would be inspected when we went to. They called it high command. When we went to Antarctica, they would call it high command. And I remember that it was always like muddy there, and it was muddy. When we went offload, it was dark, and you could see ice. It was under the ice, and it was about 50 degrees, or I think maybe they told me in Celsius, and I don't remember, but it felt like about 50 degrees cold. It was pleasant there, and I thought, man, how is this ice not melting away? But that was where we would go, and we would stop there, and we would do cargo missions. And there were many times that we would stop there, and we would stay at our post and sit there for 2 hours or 3 hours and do nothing, while the VIPs on the captain and the command crew would go inside and be briefed on a mission or whatever. But we would just stay on the ship and do nothing. It was boring.
And what stage of this was what age in the 20 and back were you?
Like in the last 2 years I was out there, so 28 years old, 28, 29.
You're
in those years.
You're mostly, you said before your position was, I mean, you're kind of like in the military, but like in this way, but you mentioned being, treated like a slave or called a slave. And was that a slave to the Germans or the Nazis or the ET? Yes. Or both? Obviously.
The Germans owned me. I was a piece of equipment, and I was treated as such. They had, they took care of me. I had 3 hot and a cot, and I had a doctor, and I was like a piece of equipment. They maintained me, but I was a slave. I wore a collar that would shock me, and I was allowed to go anywhere I wanted as long as I showed up for work on time. I could go. But there were heavy penalties if I didn't. I mean.
And they were answering to ETs, the Nazis?
Yes.
The Dracos?
There was a Draco base where we would go around Jupiter and report to. There were several that would go inside. So there was a bubble, and you'd go in it. And I was the first one to say that it was all black on the inside, that when you looked out the window, you could see no stars. And I said that well before somebody else. But that's what it was like. And inside the Draco one, it was a long, like, steel-looking, it had arms that came out of the station. It was a space station, and long arms that came out. We docked to them, and when we walked down the halls, there were windows, but they were up for they looked like the halls were built for something much taller than us. Like, we couldn't see out the window. The window was 10 feet up the wall, so some being that was tall enough to see out that was who it was made for. And they kind of had a trapezoid shape to them, and carpet. But we would go there, and I was only went on board that one time. But there was another base. So, and then when you went inside the temporal bubble, you had to go back out at the exact same way. Otherwise, you would go to it. One time we came out 16 hours into the past. So we had to wait for 16 hours to go home because we hadn't left yet.
So it seems like the Dracos are using the Nazis, who are using people like you to create this sort of thing on Earth that is like these control agendas, right? So, but what about the North?
Look, we had access to goods. We would go to Diego Garcia and pick up cargo in the middle of the night, and it's not like we paid for it. They would just pick it up. It was all from the black money. So these were things that we would trade with other worlds for tech.
Right. And of course, there's a lot of different agendas and a lot of different races, but the primary thing that we've been noticing with world wars and Illuminati would be this Draco alliance with certain individuals that use people like billionaires to, and other powerful people, but it's really, kind of.
They have all the control aggregated at the top, so that you really only need a small amount of people to control a lot of people. And if you look around it, that's how we're set up right now.
And then the Nordics and Dracos, some of the Nordics have an alliance with the Dracos, right?
I don't know the official part of it, but they all did business together. So on Ceres Colony, there were many, many, many different races of ETs that would visit. There were two indigenous, there were the Germans that were there, humans. There were humans that visited that were not from Earth. I met humans from other planets that looked just like us, talked like us. They were just like us, but they were from another planet. And there were two species that lived there that were under that basically listened to what the Germans told them. They lived under the Germans, but they lived on Ceres as well. And then many other visiting species that would come. They were doing business. They're doing trade. That's what's going on. They're all trading. Our mission on our ship when I was a cargo engineer was to trade goods for technology. Period.
So this all relates to just Second World War kind of dynamics of how humans and ETs got very involved. And I know it goes way further back, just Anunnaki type stuff. But besides Germans, I mean, there's others, right? I mean, Randy Kramer talks about something Eisenhower set up, the USMC Special Section that worked with
the Marine Corps Special Forces. So that was the Mars. That was on Mars, and there were a lot of we did a lot of times. We did cargo missions within the solar system. We went to other systems often, and most of the time. But there were many times we stayed in the solar system, and space was real estate was a premium for the Germans on Ceres Colony. They didn't have a lot of storage, huh?
And Mars colonies are mostly German bases, then?
It was a different corporation. Think about it like that. But they didn't have a lot of places to warehouse stuff. So they had a base in the Kuiper Belt on an asteroid that they had a warehouse on, and I guess everybody did. But when we would fly out there and back, we didn't jump. We would fly straight, and then we couldn't stop. We talked about Pluto, that it would have been perfect. It was a short trip from Pluto to Ceres. The Kuiper Belt was much farther out. In time wise, I forget how much it was, but I remember it sucked. We're like, man, we got to go all the way to the Kuiper Belt, and we'd stand around, do nothing, waiting for it. It was a long ride.
So it wasn't like just teleporting real quick, like.
Not within the solar system. They had it mapped out to be a full day, to take our day, because we were just doing that.
So there's a lot of.
They didn't always have stuff to do, but what I'm saying is Pluto, we weren't allowed to land there. Somebody else was in charge of it. We weren't allowed to go to Saturn. A lot of the planetoids around Saturn were taken by another program. So we were not welcome there, and there were a lot of nobody went to Venus. I remember talking about it. Nobody had access to Venus. Nobody. That there was a super advanced race there that you couldn't just go and invite yourself into Venus. Something bad would happen.
Well, it seems very protected then, and gosh, this is just so interesting. So do you know much about the Saturn moon matrix and just kind of the Satan Saturn aspect of all that, and what was talked about?
I always wanted to go to Saturn and look at it, and we did do flybys, but we weren't even allowed to be close to it. I remember that we did a flyby, and I wasn't allowed. It was one of those times when I couldn't stop what I was doing and go look out the window. I would have gotten in trouble. But for the most part, we couldn't go there. We couldn't go there, to the Titan and the bases around it. There are colonies there that have no affiliation with the Germans. And the Germans at the Ceres colony wanted they had things in place, like they tried to keep it a secret. They wanted a Ceres colony to be hidden. The entrance was hidden. They didn't have any kind of towers or things on the surface of Ceres to make it look like somebody's there. They didn't want because we regularly would go and trade with ET races and steal, and they didn't want to be tracked back to our colony. You know what I mean? It was active war. There are so many different species out there. I read a thing that said something like 7 out of 10 stars has an Earth around it. There were so many of them in the cosmos that there are so many different species that you're not going to see them all. Like we went every day. If we went every day and traded with a different one, we didn't make a scratch in my lifetime. That's how many species are out there. We're conditioned to think that there's only one or two. There's grays, there's reptiles and Nordics. couple bugs, and that's it. And even when you watch sci-fi shows, they're like only a couple. The reality is that there are billions and billions and billions of Earths, and they all have their own species around them, and they're at their own level of development. What's going
So
on?
maybe, ascension has a lot to do with being out of vibration, like you said. Come and have 80 years. We're kind of limited by the laws of the body, but as we ascend and as our consciousness ascends, we can make agreements to end up someplace else in a different form, it seems. But we have, if we're bound karmically to this planet because there's, something we have to complete or learn from in order to expand our consciousness, then we have to kind of keep coming back. And that's why it seems like many people have incarnated so many times here. But was there any, what?
You would just take it with you. If you went to another world and became a rat man, you would just, if you had an eating issue you had to take care of, you would just go be a rat man and still have an eating issue. It's you.
Right. So, our soul is really where we have some level of personal sacred space for ourselves, that we're not just waking up in some, we have our longevity and infiniteness of our soul, and it's the adventure that it's on, really. And we just keep learning and having different experiences, it seems. But there was no kind of like reputation of Saturn, like what it represented and who was there. You didn't really hear much.
I did, but I don't remember exactly what it was. I remember having conversations about it and just being bummed that we couldn't go there. I remember being upset that we couldn't go there.
Right.
Because it sounded like a good place.
Yeah, I'm just, curious because it's definitely considered to be the planet that, was a sun that used to be a sun that went dark, and it has a satanic component to it. There's a lot of Saturn worship. And so, trying to figure that one out. So I know our time is kind of coming to an end, and I just want to, see, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share? I remember one real quick thing. You were on the train and you weren't treated very nice, and so you always had to kind of, I don't know if you go into that.
So when I went into public, so at the very end, I got promoted to where they gave me money, like $20 a week, something like that. They had German money there. There was a money system in place on Ceres Colony for the people that live there. And so I could afford a train ride on, when I got off work. It was in my normal day. When I got off work, I could train ride into town. And I learned very quickly that because I was a slave and I had a slave collar, that I would get whatever picked on, like if I sat down, I remember getting on the train and it being empty, and I was first in line because I was there waiting, and I'd go and sit down. The train would fill up and then somebody would go, "You stand up, get over there." And it was like humiliating because that's how it was. But after a while, everybody would pull out their phone. They all had their own little see-through phone. And I knew that after the train started, when everybody pulled out their phone, that I wouldn't get picked on. Right. Because every now and then somebody would just enjoy it. And there was nothing I could do about it.
Where was this train?
On Ceres.
Okay.
So on Ceres, the Ceres colony is a planetoid. It's like 580 miles, I think, wide, diameter. And there are towns around the whole thing. There are rings, and they're all connected underground by a train network. And they were building like crazy. They were mining out spaces. They were looking for water. They were finding technology inside pockets. They would find a pocket of water and drain it out, and they would find ruins of ancient technology in there.
Wow.
And so that's what they were trying to do. And they were building. They would rebuild. I remember I had a girlfriend, and I would go to her apartment, and it was an old ancient technology that was converted into an apartment. And her door would read your mind. And, you could say, "I'm here now," and it would tell her that somebody's here, and she could open the door. She could make me feel pain and go away. She could communicate through and it was the door. It was a machine, but it was a big stone door shaped like a triangle. And that was there. They found there was a ruins, and they converted it into apartments.
So, interesting. Is there any kind of, like, what's the talk about Earth? If there's all these different Earths, there's something special about this particular planet. I go into a lot of that, kind of history about, the diamond heart, the mother energy, Gaia, just kind of the history behind how this planet became what it is. And
well, I think there were other planets that we went on that seemed like the same thing. They all look alike. Most of the time when I would get a chance, like in my day, like when I got lunch, I had a lunch break, and I would go onto the deck that had the observation windows. Sometimes they had the windows blacked out, like they could turn the windows off, and they would turn like a dark gray. But when I would go there, usually at that time of the day, most of the time, I'd look out the window. We'd be at like a super high altitude. I'd be looking down on cloud. It could have been Earth. looking down on clouds and ocean and land. But they were all other planets. Like
Do
they
you,
all looked alike. They all looked alike.
have you ever, I mean, is there any kind of holographic simulations where you think something's something, but it isn't, or just any kind of technology that they use to simulate certain things like a virtual reality? I just heard a little bit about that here.
They had, so the doors, I guess there was a giant doors that opened up that they didn't build. They found the original base on Ceres abandoned, that some other ET race had built, and the Germans moved into it back in the 50s or whatever. And they started, like they had mock cities, like replicas of European cities built inside caverns inside Ceres. They would go in there and build a fake, it looked like European cities. But I guess the doors on the outside to the big Ohana Mons in that crater there, the doors had a big hologram that would go over them, and they would shut it off, and you'd see these doors with lights would be on, and they'd open up, and they were gigantic. They were like 1,000 feet by 1,000 feet, and they would open up and go into the hangar area, which was miles and miles of space where ships would go in, and then it had air. I remember there were times when in the hangar area, we'd get off the ship, and instead of jumping on the train to go somewhere, we would walk, just for the fun of it, because just for something new, to the end of it. And it was low. Like there were times when at the other end of it, the doors got stuck sort of open and sucked the air out, and there was low oxygen in there, low air pressure and low oxygen. But that was that big of a place where the doors could be open and all the air wouldn't be sucked out that fast. They could pump air into it fast enough to kind of. And when we would get to the very end, there were revolving doors that went into where the town began. And we'd go through the doors, and the first couple breaths, you would go, and just it was like awesome because you got your first real back to oxygen again. It was neat.
So all these other Earths, though, were they called Earths, or did they have specific?
Oh, they had different names and different species that lived there. I really only did 2 missions on one. One was we rode and we were trying to trade with a species, and they looked kind of like imagine like it's hard to say this with a straight face, but imagine like a gray, a shorter, like a 4-foot tall gray with a rat, like a rat. And he had a rat tail and rat feet, but it was like a gray, and he had kind of round eyes and looked like a rat. It was a rat man. It was a humanoid from rats, like the way that we're evolved from monkeys. They say like that's our cousin is a monkey. Like their cousin was a rat, and we were trading with them. We're trying to trade a deal, and I went on the mission. There was another mission where I went, and it was a bigger planet. It was a heavy gravity planet, and the sky was much darker in blue. It was a dark blue, and it was a desert. And they were black, shiny black reptiles that had robes on, and their scales were shiny black. And we traded with them. We stole from them, and we got the hell out of Dodge. And we were flying what was called a double disc. It looked like one of our discs that your typical disc, but like 2 of them. It was an oval shape, a double disc they called it, and it was supposedly the reason we took it on that one is because it was fast. It was faster than what those reptiles had, so that we could get out of there.
I know some people are probably like their minds are being blown and it's really hard to wrap their heads around it. Some people might even say, well, maybe they're fake memories or memory implants, but the whole deal is that you weren't supposed to remember. So if anything, they would want to wipe your mind. Mm-hmm. Why would they want to?
I've had it all. So I've done a bunch of interviews, and I've had plenty of the negative comments on YouTube. I've sat and engaged with it, and the thing is, I didn't want to believe it myself when I remembered it all. I was blown away. I wanted therapy. I didn't know what the hell was going on with me. And when I went to Seattle and I knew my way around a place that I'd never been, and what I remembered was extremely real, I got to think, okay, fine. If they're fake memories, to what end? What am I doing with it that matters? Like so what? I'm just doing a few interviews on YouTube, right? So what is it? What am I changing? Really, nothing. I'm going into history with this, historical account. So if there are fake memories, I'm not doing anything with it that's dangerous to anybody. I'm not changing it much. So that seems like a lot of trouble to go through for very small results, to yield very little results. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's like, what would be the point? And why would somebody walk around with these kind of stories if, just to, I never, I don't these aren't
The
even
other thing is
questions that I
when I
can.
found those people, I found their obituaries, the people from Seattle, and I basically every time I find something, every time I think of something, like maybe this will prove it, I'll check it out. And I went on like Google Earth and found the places. When I find the places I went, it's blows me away. That
Yeah.
it was real. I go, man, it was real.
So
God,
yeah. So thoughts of flat Earth, being somebody who's been in space, flat Earth theory. No, I didn't
not
think so.
flat.
Every
So, and here's the thing about flat Earth. Here's the thing. I'll say this to anybody listening who even considers it, because I've watched some of the flat Earth videos, and they really work hard to sell it to you. They really put in a lot of work to sell you the flat Earth thing.
What's
I
the
really are
point?
working hard. And here's the thing: just go join an astronomy club. The physics doesn't work. Doesn't work. You can prove it that it's round to yourself. You don't need to spend a fortune. You can prove it's round, and you can get into astronomy. And anybody that has a telescope, there's no way they put a giant television that big. What would they make it out of? Even if they made it out of diamonds, it would collapse. If the whole sky was a dome, it just doesn't work. So anybody that's considering flat Earth stuff, get into astronomy. It's very rewarding. You'll learn. You'll prove it yourself,
Is it
and
just a
you'll be
distraction?
richer for it.
Yeah,
Huh?
it's kind of a distraction psyop.
It's exactly what it is. It's because now if I go to a convention and I speak and a bunch of flat earth people show up, anybody taking any kind of serious consideration will just be like turned off because that's so stupid. Because I hate to use the word stupid, but it's so stupid. If you really believe the Earth is flat, it's like you're super uneducated about the physics of the world. I mean, there's really the materials, the science that it would take, the reality of the physics evolved for the world to be flat just don't work with
Yeah.
anything. So
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of walking away just, really feeling we are in a multidimensional creation and there's just multiple species in different worlds. And we are going through a lot as humans to awaken our consciousness. And in a free will universe, or at least on this particular earth, those darker forces can be a great catalyst for our awakening. And I could talk to you forever, and I'm just hoping maybe you'll do this again with me and with
I
new.
would love to. I would love to, because it's not every day I meet somebody that understands half of it, for one. And the other thing is, I think a lot of the darker stuff, like you said, the darker forces, I think they're just exploitable people. They're
Right.
exploiting exploitable stuff.
Yeah.
And that necessarily isn't super evil. It's just that, at one point you have a responsibility, like you have a responsibility to not go into someone's house and steal from them, but at the same time they have a responsibility to lock the door,
Nice.
right?
Well,
You can't just leave your money laying out and expect somebody not to steal it. And
right.
that's kind of like a metaphor for what goes on, like of course, I'm the type of person that if you set something down valuable next to me, I'm going to guard it and make sure it doesn't go. But also that's your responsibility to take care of your own self. There's a lot to it, and the dark forces just look for people that aren't locking the door.
Right. Right. Well, that's a really, really great way to end. And is there anything that you want? Is that a good kind of close for you, or is there anything else
Well,
you?
I just love it. Okay, so I can just want to go on record to say that at the end of Trump's second term, if he wins, the next guy will probably be in on it too. But when that moon mission happens, I'll bet we're gonna get a disclosure pretty quick
And how much
on our
did
next
NASA? Go ahead.
The Artemis program. It's called.
The
It was Apollo. Artemis is the sister, I guess. I don't know, the Greek goddess Artemis. It's the Artemis program. So I guess when they go 2024, now we now have a timeline of an opportunity to disclose. And I'm going on the record right now saying that I think that's when it's going to happen. That's
Nice.
my best guess.
And NASA, how much in the know are they about secret space programs, or is it so
Like
much?
anybody else, the people at the top are fully aware and participate, and the people that are working the 9 to 5 at the bottom don't have a clue.
The
Yep.
compartmentalism. And how many
Yep.
secret space programs do you think there are? Is it accurate to say
By
about?
now, there's many. It's splintered off into many. There's probably over 100 colonies up there, and they all work together. They all work together and trade with each other, but they're all at odds with each other and in competition. It's just like any high pressure office.
Right.
People that are competing to do better than each other because it motivates them.
But as far as different secret space programs, like are you
On Earth?
Were you connected with Dark Fleet, or like what secret space program?
I guess that's the term. Nachtwaffen. I guess, you know, they kind of have a bunch of different names. I didn't want to learn German when I was up there. I was resentful toward it. That was one thing that they kept trying to get me to learn German, and I acted like I was interested, but I wasn't. I did not want to learn. Um, so they called it the term is coined Dark Fleet, so that would be them, and they were very sure of themselves. They were of the mindset that if they kept believing that they were better than everybody, that they would become better than everybody, that they would
And
mold
that's
it.
and that's part of just the mind control of Hitler and things that we saw in the war, right?
That's what they believed. Yeah.
And that whole kind of Aryan mindset, we're the superior, and then it got really kind of out of control. And yeah, and then obviously Project Paperclip coming to the U.S. I could just go on, and I know.
I know. We could go. You know, 20 years is a lot to talk about, and then when you talk about where our world's at today, a lot of things are going to change soon. And the only thing I could say to anybody is just learn yourself, find out your own problems and work on them, because our entire world is going to change quick, and you need to be the best you to get onto it, to get on with it. That's
Yeah,
the only thing we can do right now. Is just everybody needs to make themselves better, and fix your weaknesses, and expand on your strengths. That's the only thing we can do right now.
definitely, definitely. Well, thank you so much. Is there any info as far as like website or where people can find you? Or
Not yet. I'm just trying to get my regular life together. I'll come back to it soon. Now we have a timeline of stuff to do. Now I know I want to get my book done before 2024.
okay, wonderful.
So
Well, I look
that's
forward
okay.
to next time. I hope we can make this happen again. And you're just
Laura, I'm a fan. I love you to death. Keep up the great work.
oh,
I watch you from a distance, and I'm so happy to have done this with you. I feel very honored to be here with you today, and I just love you.
I love you
So
too
I'll talk to you soon.
so much. Okay, bye bye.